Hi everyone, welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Michael Tremblay, and today I'm going to be talking about 7 Stoic habits. And what I mean by habits are little changes you can make to your behavior or your actions that can help you and let you live a bit more of a Stoic life. And I really wanted to focus on things that were dividable, chunkable, break-offable from Stoic theory. Because a lot of times when we're learning about Stoicism, there's so much going on. There's such a complete, holistic system there that it can be hard to know where to start. And so these are things that, hey, I want to put something in practice in my life, make a little bit of a difference. Here are some suggestions about how to do that according to Stoicism. So 7 ways to live a bit more Stoic is what I'll be talking about today. I'm going to break these off into 3 categories. First is about thinking well, so habits for thinking, for improving your thinking, improving how you reflect about the world. The second category is living mindfully, so habits for being more philosophical in your approach to life. And the third category is preparing for adversity, so really ways to help you handle better the next stressful situation, the next crisis in your own life. And so starting with that, we're going to start with thinking well. And so the first habit for thinking well is what the Stoics call prosoche, which is really paying attention. They have this sign, if you're in Greece, it'll say prosoche when you're stepping out of the subway, for example, and the trains are moving and you got to watch your step. If you think of that I'm in the United States right now, and so you have a sign of like watch out or pay attention. That's prosoche. And that's what the Stoics want us to do really at any moment in our life. I'd say if there's any habit that's most important in Stoicism, it's this one, which is just paying attention to how you're thinking, what you're thinking about, really the contents of your mind. So a quote here from Epictetus. This is from Epictetus's Handbook, Book 4, Part 12, where Epictetus warns about the dangers of not paying attention. Epictetus says, "When you have remitted your attention for a short time, do not imagine this, that you'll recover it when you choose. But let this thought be present to you, that in consequence of the fault committed today, your affairs must be in worse condition for all that follows." And so Epictetus' point here is that if we don't have this habit of paying attention, if we make little mistakes in how we think or how we react, someone insults us and we take that personally, there's an advertisement or something you see on the media that's, oh, you should really care about how you look, or you should really care about buying this new product, this new thing. If we're not paying attention and we allow those ideas to enter into our mind really unquestioned or unreflectively, then they fester, they get stronger, they become a part of us, right? We integrate them into who we are. So paying attention is really, prosoche is really about noticing, in Stoic terms, the impressions you experience, noticing your thoughts, noticing the world around you, paying attention to it. And it's the first step is just flagging these things. Marcus Aurelius says a lot that the world is opinion. And really what he means by this is not that there's no objective truth, but just that our internal world is really nothing more than a series of impressions we have that we choose to form into beliefs. We choose to make them things we believe. So another way of putting that is, if someone insults me, at first that's just the thing I've experienced. That's just an impression. But if I choose to take it as true, I choose to assent to it, endorse it, then it becomes part of my life. Then I feel I've been hurt, I've been harmed, and it's something I carry with me. So this is the first strategy, is just to notice. If you want to develop one Stoic habit, it is just noticing what you're thinking, noticing the kind of messages or impressions you're receiving, your first impressions of situations, just kind of clocking those as opinion, not necessarily truths, but things you believe on a first impression. And so that's habit 1. I think when you're first starting this, just take some time to do it really mindfully and attentively. It becomes a bit of a second nature after practicing for a while, but when to start, really just if you can carve out an hour, carve out even 10 minutes to just try to do this, and you'll begin to notice more and more of the impressions you're receiving. So that's prosoche. The second habit is what I'm calling skepticism. So if prosoche is about, what are my impressions, then skepticism is this habit of interrogating these impressions. Are these impressions true? So the first one is just flagging them. The impressions are coming up on your radar. And then the second habit, skepticism, is, well, what is this thing? Do I believe it? Is it true? Is it something I want to act on? Or is it someone lying to me? Is it someone trying to persuade me in a way that I don't think is true? I think about this a lot in terms of social media or advertisements where people are constantly presenting you messages. And step 1 is to just recognize, well, this is just a message. Somebody's trying to communicate something. It's not true or false. It's just something I'm receiving. And then step 2 is to question it. It's to say, well, is it true? Is it false? That's that habit of skepticism. A line from Epictetus here in his discourses, book 2, chapter 18, he says, "In the first place, be not hurried away by the rapidity of the appearance, but say, appearances, wait for me a little. Let me see who you are and what you're about. Let me put you to the test." And that's really what the habit of skepticism is you don't jump from impression to belief. You interrogate it. And notice that Epictetus is also emphasizing to not be rapid. So it's not skeptical in the way that I mean it. It's not skeptical to reject everything as false. It's not Stoic to say, well, I don't agree with any of this. I don't believe in any of the things that I'm being told. I'm just going to shut out every impression I receive. The skeptic strategy is to stop. You pause and you say, well, is it actually true or not? Is that thing the person's telling me true or not? Is that impression I had true or not? If I was using the example of an insult before, and I love Epictetus's discussions of insults sometimes, where he would be one of his students would say, "Epictetus, this person's insulting you," and he says, "Oh, well, they must have not known me very well. Otherwise, they would have mentioned the other things that are bad about me." And part of the joke about that is not letting yourself take it too seriously when you get insulted. But the other part of Epictetus's joke there is, well, there's some truth to it, right? We all have problems. And if somebody's saying something bad about us, maybe the thing they're saying is true. And in which case, what is the insult but just a description of fact? And so that's some of the ways that you can handle skepticism. It's really slowing down, interrogating the impression, trying to decide if it's true or not. Then the third habit for living well, so after you notice your impressions, you're practicing prosoche, then you're practicing skepticism. You're actually interrogating the impressions, deciding are they true or not. The third habit to develop is one of reflection. This is when you intervene on your impressions with Stoic principles. It's when you introduce Stoic philosophy to help you decide if something's true or not. So a non-Stoic could be mindful and they could be skeptical. They could even be reflective, but they're not being reflective with Stoic theory. That's what separates the Stoic apart, is the Stoic uses Stoic theory to determine the truth of the situation or not. So, for example, if you're insulted and your first impression is that's a bad thing, well, the Stoic, once you bring in Stoic theory, Stoicism says, that's not up to me. Those are just the words of another person. If they're true, well, then I should probably accept that about myself. If they're saying, well, you're a selfish person, or you're not a very nice person, or you're particularly bad at this sport, or you're short, or you're a bit weird looking. It's like, well, if these things are facts about the world, then I should probably accept and confront the facts. And if they're not true, well, then that's just it's something somebody's saying, right? There's no reason for that to get under my skin too much. But that's a Stoic idea, right? This idea of focusing on what's up to you, living in accordance with nature, living in accordance with the truth of the matter. That's the Stoic criteria for determining impressions, which will be entirely different than what Buddhist does, or Christian, or an Epicurean, or any other way of living. So that's that third habit, though, is reflection. And if you're doing that as a Stoic, you're introducing Stoic theory. And I'll give a really good example of this. I just came upon this quote when preparing for this episode. I know there was a really good example of Marcus Aurelius doing this. And his meditations are really cool because he is this Stoic in practice. He's putting Stoicism to work. And here he's doing this process of reflection. So this is Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, Book 12, Chapter 26. And he says, when you're troubled about anything, you've forgotten this. And then he lists off a bunch of Stoic theories to remember, to use in his reflection. He says that all things happen according to the universal nature, that a man's wrongful act is nothing to you, that everything which happens always happened so and will happen so, and now happens so everywhere. How close is the kinship between a man and the whole human race? For it's a community, not of a little blood or seed, but of intelligence. That every man's intelligence is a god, and is an efflux of the deity. That nothing is a man's own, but that his child and his body and his very soul come from the deity. That everything is opinion. And lastly, you have forgotten that every man lives the present time only and loses only this. End of quote. So that's Marcus really insightfully saying to himself, I'm upset because I've forgotten these truths that Stoicism teaches, or these pieces of Stoic theory. That there's a kinship between all of us, he says, that when a man does something unvirtuous, when someone else acts poorly, that's not a harm to you, that's a harm to them. That all things happen according to the universal nature, that the world is fated, he mentions. And I love the last one, that we only ever live in the present, and so we only lose this. When things happen to us, we're only ever experiencing that present moment or losing that present moment. And an implication of that is that we exaggerate when we talk about losing something in the future, or we regret something in the past. And so that's him practicing that habit of reflection. He's saying, I'm upset because I've forgotten these principles. I need to pull these principles back to my mind, and I need to use them to reflect on the impressions and to come to better answers. We keep these on hand, as Epictetus uses a metaphor all the time, keeping your theory on hand. But you use this Stoic theory in reflection. And then those are Marcus's examples, but there's other pieces you can use for reflection. You can use memento mori, the dichotomy of control, the obstacle is the way. All of these Stoic lessons, they're interesting to read about, and they're these fun paradigm shifts when you first learn about them. But the habit you want to use is you want to actually pull them in and change the way you think about things. Pull them in and use them to help when you're deliberating and thinking about the situations in your life and how you feel about those situations. You want to put them to use, right? Render them valuable to yourself. So those are the first three habits. We got prosoke, it's noticing your impressions. Question is, what do I think? You've got skepticism, that's questioning your impressions. Is this true? Is what I think true? Then the third habit is reflection. That's intervening on your impressions with Stoic principles. So how might I decide if this is true? What criteria will I use to determine if my impression is true? And those are three habits I think we can all get better at doing. Next, I want to turn to the second category of habit, which I call living mindfully. And this is just a way of making philosophy a larger part of your life. So if the first three were about thinking well in the moment, then this is a habit for thinking more stoically, generally, becoming more of a Stoic in how you approach all things, not just stressful or challenging situations. And the habit here is one of daily reflections. And that is see how well you did in terms of thinking well. Did you think well? You need to reflect upon that. One example of a daily reflection can be journaling. You can think of this as Marcus Aurelius's Meditations as a journal. People use this practice today, but the Stoics were also doing it. Marcus Aurelius was recording, reflecting on his life, reflecting on his decisions. But I also don't think the habit of daily reflection needs to be that formal. If you find sitting down and journaling either in the morning or at the end of the day, if you find either of those helpful, that's great. But I don't think reflection has to be formalized. Seneca, for example, describes just thinking, just reflecting actively and giving himself time to think about his day. Does this in On Anger. This is book 3, section 36. When the light has been removed and my wife has fallen silent, aware of this habit that's now mine, I examine my entire day and go back over what I've done and said, hiding nothing from myself, passing nothing by. So that's an example of a daily reflection from Seneca. It's not clear to me there if that involves journaling, but what it does involve is honesty, being candid, passing nothing by, as he says, reflecting honestly about the parts of yourself where you first fell short, and then likewise the parts of your day where you did really well and you lived up to your expectations or exceeded them. I think the reflection is really important because ultimately we're engaged in a craft or a skill when we're doing Stoicism. We're trying to, like an athlete, turn ourselves into a certain kind of person, a Stoic person. And when you do any of the other kind of skill, it's a sport, an art, an instrument, anything like this, you always want to set these kind of benchmarks for yourself or reflect on your progress. And that's a way of telling what's going well and what's going poorly. And that's what the daily reflection is. It's an opportunity to be mindful about your Stoic practice. So I think it's a really important habit. There's a phrase by a 19th century Scottish physicist, Lord Kelvin, and it's often paraphrased as, only what gets measured gets managed. And journaling or your daily reflection, that's your opportunity to measure. And so only what we take the time to reflect upon and take the time to evaluate gets attention, gets focused improvement. So make sure you're reflecting upon and you're evaluating, did I live stoically? Did I live up to the kind of life I want to have? Again, both celebrating the good parts and being honest and accountable for the less than ideal parts. So that's the fourth habit, daily reflection. Next, I want to go into this third category, what I call preparing for adversity. And these will be 3 habits that will make you more robust. And I almost think of them as like defensive habits, or things that you want to do even when things are going well. So if you think of the first group, thinking well, that attention, skepticism, reflection, that's really important in high stress, difficult situations. It's important in the day-to-day too, but the biggest issues will come when you don't pay attention in moments that really evoke anger or frustration or any sort of extreme emotion, either sadness or even being too excited or elated about the wrong thing. But I think about these habits about preparing for adversity as the kind of things you want to be doing all the time to kind of build up that muscle and skill so you're ready to apply it when the stressful situations come. As they're proactive habits in a way. The first one, it sounds obvious, but I think it's important to call out, is just learning about Stoicism, either by writing, reading, talking with people, listening to a podcast like this. You're doing that habit right now, so good job if you're listening to this. You've made it 20 minutes in. You're putting in the work today to build that habit. And the reason I think of this as a habit is because I talked about reflection earlier, which is this idea of introducing Stoic theory to help you evaluate the impressions you receive. And I had that quote from Marcus Aurelius a few minutes ago. But that's not going to be the kind of thing that works if something really serious has happened in my life. I'm now going to pull up a passage of Stoicism and read it. Maybe that will be helpful. I'm sure many people came to Stoicism because of that reason, but it's not going to be as helpful as if you had been really digesting, really understanding the Stoic theory for years until that moment. And that's why learning about Stoicism, reading, writing, talking about it with friends, it's a proactive approach, so that you really understand these arguments, the depth of them, why the Stoics are making them, so that they're much more convincing for you. And they don't feel like Band-Aids. They don't feel like things you're just reading to, help your suffering or help your pain, but things you really believe and understand to be true. It's a big difference between evoking the dichotomy of control and just saying, well, I'm just going to not think about that thing that's stressful to me because it's not up to me, and really understanding Epictetus's arguments around why we should focus on what's up to us because we want to be good people. That's what a good life consists in, and that means living well and doing the well with the cards we're dealt and the decisions we can make. The two entirely different kinds of arguments. I have a quote here from Epictetus. This is Epictetus's handbook, his Discourses, book 3, chapter 24. And Epictetus says, "Let these thoughts be ready at hand by night and by day. These you should write, these you should read, about these you should talk to yourself and to others." I love that he provides all the different versions in that quote. You keep these thoughts at hand, these Stoic principles, he's saying, write them. Read them, talk about them with other people, argue about Stoicism with other people, debate Stoicism with other people, talk about them with yourself, wrestle with these ideas, confront them in your mind, pull at them, test them. This is really what Epictetus is saying. And if you do that, then they'll be at hand. There'll be these really kind of sharpened tools for you to employ in stressful situations. And that's why it's a proactive habit. If you don't read or study or talk about Stoicism or listen to Stoicism content like you're doing right now, if you don't do that for months, you're not going to be able to employ its more insightful ideas in the stressful situations that come up. So that's this proactive habit, learning about Stoicism. The next proactive habit is negative visualization. This is one that we've talked about a lot on this podcast. There's a great line from the Meditations, book 2, part 1, where Marcus Aurelius says, "Begin the morning by saying to yourself, I shall meet with the busybody, the ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, unsocial." And negative visualization, that's a great example of that from Marcus. It's this strategy of being explicit about the bad things that could happen, or the dispreferable, more specifically, things that could happen and will happen, the things we would rather not be the case, but being honest about both the ones that we know will come up. We know we're going to encounter rude, ungrateful, mean people on the day-to-day. Be honest about that. And then be honest about the possibility of other things going poorly. So one thing that Epictetus does in some of his more intense passages, he talks about preparing for the death of family members, preparing for the death of children as a possibility. And the function of negative visualization, again, it's not to numb yourself. When you think of Stoicism really thinks of living well like a kind of battle. I think, some like a pitcher throws a fastball at you, and are you able to hit it the right way under pressure? And the Stoic thinks, you've got to get to the batting cage and you've got to swing against a bunch of fastballs coming from just a robot, a machine. To really build that muscle, you got to think about, what would I do in that situation? What would it be like? How would it feel? You've got to practice taking those swings, so when the moment comes, you're ready to swing properly, right? Not when the moment comes, you're ready to be numb. It's not that when the moment comes, you're ready to not feel pain. It's so that when the moment comes, you're ready to act properly. I've never played baseball, so excuse me if any of those metaphors were painful, but You can't just get on the pitch and then the pitcher throws at you and that's the first time you've swung at a ball like that. It's not going to work. And what I mean by that about swinging well, not just numbing yourself, Epictetus does another example of when he deals with a father who's run away from home because his daughter is very sick and he's basically having an emotional breakdown because he can't handle seeing his daughter be so sick and maybe dying. And I always return to that when I think of that as a good example of negative visualization, is that the point isn't that the father is undisturbed by his sick daughter. It's a terrible thing. In terms of the world of dispreferred indifference, it's one of the most dispreferred things. It's the thing you do not want to happen. But because he hasn't accepted the fact that it could happen, he hasn't visualized it or prepared for it, he's not able to be a good father. He runs away, he abandons his daughter when she's sick. And so that's the function of negative visualization. Not to numb ourselves, but to be able to act well and efficiently and effectively in those stressful moments. Along the same lines, so that was the proactive habit of negative visualization. The last one, the seventh habit, is voluntary discomfort. And so this is a habit we can take on, something you can practice once a week, something you can practice once a day. It's just the habit of doing something that you don't like to do and that you don't want to do. And Seneca describes this. Seneca, obviously very rich, very successful Roman. He describes this practice in his letters to Lucilius, letter 18, section 5. He says, "Set aside a certain number of days, during which you'll be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, with coarse and rough dress, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition that I feared?'" So in other words, he's saying, every once in a while, give yourself a couple days where you eat terrible food, you dress poorly, but what I think that means is you dress uncomfortably. Maybe you don't need to necessarily sleep on the floor, but maybe you rough it a bit. I think in today's world, maybe people do that with camping. I did a hiking trip last year. It was tough. It was really physically tough to do a hard thing and then sleep uncomfortably, and then do a hard thing again. And the reason we want to practice voluntary discomfort is not, virtue doesn't come through suffering. Stoics aren't arguing anything like that, but the view is that virtuous people are ready for suffering. They're prepared to handle the difficult situations well when they do come. And so every once in a while, we want to, again, flex that muscle. We want to prepare ourselves for those kind of situations by putting ourselves in those kind of situations. And, maybe you don't need to practice voluntary discomfort. Maybe you've got a pretty difficult life already. And I don't think if you do, I don't think the Stoics are saying you should make it more difficult. I think that's a bit silly. But I think many of us maybe have lives that are uncomfortable in one sense, but comfortable in another, right? So if you have a successful desk job, your life may be very stressful. You might feel a lot of pressure, but it might be very comfortable physically. You might never have to worry about where your next meal's coming from, or ever sleep in an uncomfortable situation. Depending on who you're surrounded by, you maybe never have to worry about physical danger. Again, some people do, and I think if you're in those situations, you can use those as examples. You use those as practice. You don't need to add more to the fire. But I think the Stoics are just making an important reminder that, look, if there's all these aspects to life. There's like the stress you're experiencing. There's the social interactions. There's your possessions. Do you have food? Where are you sleeping? There is your life stable or is it chaotic? And if these are generally going pretty well, consider every once in a while just intentionally throwing a bit of wrench into things. Not sabotaging, but just, like you said, go on a camping trip, for example. It doesn't have to be any more or less complex than that, so that you can experience what it's like to not have one of the things you have. Because A Stoic argument is basically you're not guaranteed to have it. You're not owed it. And there's no way of telling that you'll have this physical comfort or this stability or these healthy relationships for forever. So you want a little bit of practice dealing with their opposites. And so that's the habit of voluntary discomfort. You can do that as much or as little as you want, but it's something that you can really easily add into your day. So going back in summary, I tried to cover here 7 habits, and I call them habits because I think they're the thing that any successful Stoic will be practicing regularly. I also think they're things that you can add piecemeal to your life. So I think any of the 7 can be added to any kind of life. And you want to focus on where you're struggling or focus on where you think the habit will make the biggest difference. I covered 3 habits for thinking well. So there was prosoke, paying attention, noticing what you're thinking, noticing what's going on in your mind. Second habit for thinking well is skepticism. That's then just introducing the question, is what I'm thinking true? Is what's going through my mind reflective of the way things are? It's a habit of always holding truth as that standard and then questioning if things are living up to that standard. Third habit of living well is reflection, which is, well, to determine if it's true or not, I'm going to introduce Stoic theory. I'm going to test the idea against Stoicism and see if it holds up. And really that's what makes you a Stoic, right? You can reflect using any criteria you want, but what sets aside a Stoic from a non-Stoic is they're going to reflect using Stoic theory. They're going to use that as the standard of proof. Then there's a habit for living mindfully, and that's daily reflections. So setting aside a little bit of time each day to think about how you lived, what you did. Did you live up to Stoicism? Were there parts of your day you'd want to improve? Parts of your day you thought you did a great job and want to continue to strengthen? Then there are 3 habits that I'd say are proactive habits. They're ones that are designed for preparing for adversity. First is learning about Stoicism. Just doing what you're doing now, listening to a podcast, reading a blog, reading a book, watching a video, talking about it with friends. I think discussion is such a helpful tool. That's one thing I love, is having those podcasts with Caleb has really made my Stoicism better because I've just had the chance to talk about it with another person. And we want to learn about Stoicism, again, not so we can recite things, not so we can show off how much we know, but so that when we do the reflection, when we use Stoic theory to evaluate the truth of things, we are prepared with a really deep understanding of these things we've been learning about, digesting, and reflecting on for a long time. The next proactive habit is negative visualization. That is imagining the things we don't want to happening, reflecting that they're either going to happen, like in the case of meeting ungrateful people, or they're potentially going to happen, like in the case of loved ones getting sick or passing, situations like this. Negative visualization is not about numbing yourself. It's not about becoming jaded or cynical in the modern sense of cynical. It's about preparing yourself to act well in those moments. And you can't act well in those moments if when you experience them, that's the first time you've thought about it. That's the first time you've encountered it. Those stressful situations are not the time to practice how you think and feel about these things. And then the last habit is voluntary discomfort. And that is the habit of putting yourself in difficult situations, especially about the kinds of things in your life that are actually going well. So if you don't experience physical discomfort, going out and exercising, camping, eating a more minimalistic diet for a certain period of time, giving yourself a chance to experience the things that your life, fortunately, doesn't make you experience that often. We use the example of a physical discomfort a lot, but it could be any other kind of discomfort. Giving yourself a chance to practice dealing with things that are uncomfortable, again, as a proactive habit, so that when they do come up, you're prepared and ready to deal with them if they do. And so I guess if you're wondering about where to start, really the Stoics always recommend, Where do you think you need the most help? Where do you think you need the most course correction? You're the kind of person who thinks really well in the moment, but something unexpected happens and it throws you off. Well, maybe the proactive habits. Or maybe you love to learn about Stoicism, but you have trouble applying it in the moment. Well, then look to the habits for thinking well. And then maybe all of those are going well, but you're not really sure maybe how they're fitting together. Well, then think about a daily reflection or a journaling practice. So those are 7 Stoic habits, and I hope that was helpful. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks for listening to Stoic Conversations. Please give us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and share it with a friend. If you want to dive deeper still, search Stoa in the App Store or Play Store for a complete app with routines, meditations, and lessons designed to help people become more stoic. And I'd also like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. You can find more of his work at ancientlyre.com. And finally, please get in touch with us. Send a message to stoa@stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback, questions, or recommendations. Until next time.